Am I the a-hole for thinking I was handling things maturely, only to find out I was actually making it worse? Well, I think we need some context. Let's get into it.
The Bearded Take with Ethan X.
So, I, 32 male, have been with my girlfriend, 29 female, for 3 years. Overall, great relationship. We didn't scream at each other, don't do dramatic breakups, we don't air things out publicly. We are mature. Or at least, I thought we were. The issue started small. She has a close male friend from college we'll call Ryan. They dated briefly years ago, but it didn't work. But they stayed friends. I've always known about him, and I've always told myself I'm mature enough to handle that. They text, they grab coffee sometimes, he shows up to group events. Nothing secretive, nothing obviously inappropriate. But over time, I started noticing little things. Inside jokes I didn't get, longer hugs than I expected, private conversations that would stop when I walked over, and every time I felt uncomfortable, I swallowed it because I didn't want to be that insecure guy. When she'd say she was grabbing dinner with him, I'd say, "Cool, have fun." When he'd comment on her photos with little fire emojis or "you look amazing," I'd ignore it because I didn't want to seem jealous. In my head, I was being mature. Secure, trusting. Then one night we were out with friends, and Ryan showed up late. She lit up when he walked in, not in a dramatic way, just noticeably. At some point during the night, I walked back from the bar and saw them talking in a corner. Close, not touching, but close. And I felt that same uncomfortable twist in my stomach. But again, I said nothing. Later that night, she asked if everything was okay, and I said, "Yeah, of course, because that's what mature people do, right?" The breaking point happened last week. She told me she and Ryan were going on a weekend hiking trip, just the two of them. I paused, but I didn't explode. Didn't accuse, didn't forbid. I just said, "Okay." She looked surprised, asked if I was sure, and I said, "Yeah, I trust you." And I meant it. At least I thought I did. And they went, posted photos, smiling, inside jokes and captions, comments like, "Needed this reset." And that's when it hit me. I wasn't being mature. I was being avoidant. Because the whole weekend I was miserable. Refreshing Instagram, overthinking everything, imagining worst case scenarios. When she came back, she was glowing, happy, relaxed, and I was resentful. She asked how my weekend was, and I snapped. Not yelling, just cold and distant, passive aggressive. She immediately picked up on it, and when she pressed me, I finally admitted it. I told her I wasn't comfortable with the trip, that it bothered me, and that I've been uncomfortable for months, and she just stared at me. Then she said something that honestly hurt. She said, "Why didn't you say something before?" And I didn't have a good answer because I thought saying nothing made me mature, but apparently it just made me dishonest. So now she's upset, not because I was uncomfortable, but because I pretended I wasn't. She said, "It feels like you were secretly keeping score." And I guess I kind of was. Now she's questioning whether I actually trust her at all. And I'm questioning whether I handled this the worst possible way. Because if I had just said something early, maybe it wouldn't have built into this. Instead, I let it grow quietly. And now it feels way bigger than it ever needed to be. So am I the a-hole for thinking I was being mature when I was really just avoiding the conversation? So, some quick thoughts. I can certainly understand why we would feel uncomfortable if your girlfriend and Ryan had this past relationship that was romantic and they decided to stay friends over the years. But we've been together for 3 years, so I'm not really getting the sense that there's anything romantic going on between them. Maybe they're just like besties and we can't handle that because he's of the opposite sex. I'm not really sure how to feel about this so far because there's some missing context. Thankfully, there's an update that might provide some of that context for us. So let's hop into that. It's not as simple as she went on a trip with her ex. Ryan isn't just some random guy from her past. He's deeply embedded in her life. They met freshman year of college, dated for about 6 months. It ended because, according to her, they wanted different things, but they never really stopped being close. When her dad passed away 2 years ago, Ryan was there, before I was. He drove her home from the hospital when she found out. He sat with her family. He helped plan parts of the funeral. I was there too, obviously, but she's admitted that Ryan saw her in one of the worst moments of her life, and that kind of bond doesn't disappear. He also knows her entire story, every version of her before me. All the stories, all the people, all the phases. Sometimes when they talk, it feels like they're referencing a version of her I don't fully know. And I think that's part of what makes me uncomfortable. But here's the part I didn't say before. I've met him a lot, and he's not a villain. He's not creepy. He's not overly flirty in person. He's not trying to push me out of the picture. If anything, he's been polite to me, which almost makes it harder. And the hiking trip? Apparently it wasn't some spontaneous romantic getaway. They've done similar outdoor trips before, even when she was single. It's something they've bonded over years ago. She said it didn't even occur to her that it would have been inappropriate because that's just how it's always been. But here's where things get murkier. After I finally admitted how I felt, she asked me something I wasn't prepared for. She said, "Are you uncomfortable because you don't trust me or because you don't trust him?" And I didn't have a clear answer because I do trust her. I really do. But I also know feelings are complicated. History is complicated, and comfort can blur lines slowly. She also told me something I didn't know. A few months ago, Ryan apparently asked her if she was really happy. Not in a dramatic way, just casually, but it stuck with her, and now I can't stop thinking about that. She insists nothing physical has ever happened since they've been together, and I believe her. But she did admit that Ryan has always been her what if, the person she could have built a different life with if things had lined up differently. And yeah, that one landed hard. She says that doesn't mean she wants that life. It just means it existed, and I can't decide if that's honest or dangerous. She also said something else that I'm still unpacking. She said, "I thought I had to choose between my past and my present, and now I'm wondering if I actually made it a choice." We're not broken up, we're not screaming at each other, but we're definitely reevaluating. Because now it's not just about one hiking trip, it's about whether two people can stay that close after love was once involved, without something slowly shifting under the surface. And I genuinely don't know if I'm being insecure or if I'm the one acknowledging that history doesn't just disappear because you call it a friendship. So here's the thing. The added context definitely helps because it sounds like they dated for 6 months, decided they just weren't right for each other, and then just stayed friends. So I don't know if that means that, there were spontaneous romantic happenings in between, or if they really just decided that a romantic relationship wasn't for them. Because there's nothing else that really indicates that there's any romantic feelings whatsoever, other than the fact that she said, that Ryan is her what if. But I feel like you can have feelings like that without having the desire to act on them. But I do suppose that, if you are having feelings like that and you wonder, at least from time to time, like, what if we did decide to date and then we had been together for 3 years and I don't know, whatever would have happened if they did decide to stay together as a romantic couple. I could definitely understand why we're concerned at the thought of him being the what if. But if there's no indication of there actually being any sort of romantic happenings and they're just like besties, then I don't know. I mean, I guess it really comes down to personal preference, but that also kind of comes back to communication being a really important aspect to a relationship because you're the one that kind of blindsided her with these feelings that you were having, even though you just thought that you were being mature. And I don't know if that came from a place of thinking that you would just get over it after a while, or I suppose the other thing you might have been thinking without saying it is that you thought over time that their relationship would be a little less close as your relationship with her got longer and closer. I think you should definitely be asking yourself, where are these feelings coming from and why are they feeling so intense all of a sudden? Like, is there something in the relationship that you're having with her that is making you potentially jealous or insecure about the friendship that she has with Ryan? And if he was around as her best friend, who just so happens to be a man, but also technically her ex, if he was around before you, and you were able to develop a 3-year-long relationship with her that feels like a normal relationship, then what exactly is it about the relationship that they have that bothers you? But there's a final update, so before we try to read between the lines anymore, let's just see what else this story has to offer. Alright, this is the last update because there's not really anything left to unpack after this. Things didn't explode, there wasn't a screaming match, no dramatic cheating confession. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse. After our last conversation, we agreed to take a few days to really think. No ultimatums, no you have to cut him off, just space to be honest with ourselves. 2 nights later, she came over to my place, sat down across from me, and I could tell before she said anything that she'd already made a decision. She told me she talked to Ryan. Not about details, just about everything. About me feeling uncomfortable, about the tension, and the what if comment. And she said something that completely knocked the air out of me. She said, I asked him if he still has feelings for me, and I already knew the answer before she said it. He does. He didn't confess in some grand romantic way, and he didn't try to steal her. He just said, if things were different, I wouldn't hesitate. That's it. And apparently that hit her harder than she expected, because for the first time she realized it wasn't just some harmless lifelong friendship. There was weight there, potential there. And then she said something I'll probably replay in my head for a long time. I don't think I've been completely honest with myself. She said she loves me. She really does. But she also admitted that when she's with him, there's a version of her that feels lighter, less responsible, less future focused, less serious. And she doesn't know if that's nostalgia or compatibility or just comfort. But she said this, I can't promise you I wouldn't always wonder. And that's when I realized this wasn't about maturity or insecurity or boundaries. It was about timing and unfinished chapters. I asked her the only thing that mattered. Do you want to choose me? Or do you want to explore the what if? And she didn't answer right away. The silence told me everything. She finally said, I don't want to resent you if I never figure that out. So we ended it. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. She didn't run to him, not immediately, but she didn't promise she wouldn't either. And here's the part that makes this really hard to swallow. I don't think she cheated, and I don't think she lied. I don't think she did anything technically wrong, but I also don't think she was fully mine. Not emotionally, not completely. And maybe that's worse. So yeah, I thought I was being mature by staying quiet. Turns out I was just delaying the inevitable. Sometimes it's not about someone crossing a line. Sometimes it's about realizing you were standing on one the whole time. And now, I guess we both get to find out what happens when you finally step over it. So maybe I have to backpedal a little bit about my initial thoughts between the 2 updates. And I think a lot of it has to do with how he sort of presented things during the initial parts of the story, because it didn't sound like there was anything weird going on. Like, I've definitely been friends with the opposite sex before. Maybe I haven't gone on weekend-long camping trips before, and it was before I was in a long-term serious relationship or marriage, but I don't think it's impossible to be just friends with people of the opposite sex. But it does get a little bit weird when you talk about being besties with your ex. So maybe I was just a little bit naive reading the story early on, but a lot of it just has to do with how the OP was presenting the whole situation. Because it does sound like the person cared about her, and it all sounded like it was a non-flirty, just friend relationship. He was there for her through some tough times, and they just, had a strong friendship. But apparently, maybe they were both just hiding under past feelings, and neither of them wanted to admit it until she was in a relationship and it had to be brought up. So, of course, the all-important question is, am I the a-hole for thinking I was handling things maturely only to find out I was actually making it worse? Well, I'm not going to say that you're an a-hole for it, but communication is very important. And if this Ryan has been around the entire time, and we're waiting until we've been together for 3 years to express any amount of concern that we might have about their friendship, then you have to take some responsibility in that part. I wasn't expecting it to go the way that it did in the end, where she basically left you for him. But again, I mean, that's why communication is so important because you could have asked these questions earlier on and maybe been able to read between the lines a little bit more. It's hard to say. This whole thing is kind of weird, to be honest. But if these feelings were lingering for as long as they were, that you were having, that you thought you were just being mature about, then, I think that is a sign to yourself that, maybe there's more to it than just me feeling like I'm being immature if I express these feelings. And if you had said something early on and she had a really immature response about the whole thing or got defensive about it, then, that would have been a sign on its own. So it sucks that it ended the way that it did, but it could always be worse. It definitely could always be worse. 3 years wasted, yes, but we weren't married. We didn't have any other obligations to each other. So I think you definitely walked away with a very important lesson. So that's my take. Not the a-hole, but definitely needs to be more honest with yourself and communicate better. But now, for the listeners, as always, I want to know your thoughts in the comments, so let me know. Thanks for tuning in.